Welcome to another edition of the Sundown series, and as you can see, we are now moving into another location, a whole nother state, and an entire different time zone. We are now on the left coast, known as the West Coast, where we are first entering the furthest West Coast state you can get to outside of Washington State in Oregon, and that is none other than California. And in our first stop, we're headed to Burbank. Now, with this one, it wasn't as easy for me to find a lot of information about Burbank, California, as far as their sundown town goes, as far as their sundown town history. But I was able to find bits and pieces there, mainly because Burbank, California has become such a huge infrastructure for Hollywood. As a matter of fact, if you go to California, the Hollywood sign, that's in Burbank. A lot of those movie studios like Warner Brothers, Disney, Paramount, what used to be 20th Century Fox, is all in Burbank. A lot of your television shows, like talk shows that film out of California, are filmed in Burbank. So Burbank is pretty much the haven for Hollywood. I guess you can put it that way, which is pretty much in LA. But what I did find was basically some little bits here and there. So this probably won't be a lengthy video, but it's going to talk about a little bit of its sundown history. So basically some stuff that I did find about Burbank as far as sundown town goes is that Burbank was actually seen as a sundown town up into the 80s. So you got to think, when was Hollywood established? Like what, in the 20s maybe? And according to what I found, Burbank was a sundown town all the way up through the 80s and really didn't divest away from that until then and then going forward. So it's not too far off from not being a sundown town anymore. There might be some parts in Burbank you may not want to be caught in after sundown. Another little thing that I did find about this is they said that the black population, as far as the men go in Burbank and back in the 50s, was extremely low, but it was also high at the same time. Reason being is because during like the 1950s, you had a lot of black women who lived in Burbank, and how that happened is because they were called live-in domestics. Basically, you had housekeepers and maids who worked for palm-colored people, in which they lived in the home or in a sector, well, maybe not in the home, but in a sector near the house, where, you know, they could be in close proximity, so they wouldn't travel back and forth, maybe from their home to the place where they worked at. And it was hard for a lot of black men in particular to get jobs during that time, but it was easier for black women to get jobs because those were the only type of jobs that were available to them. You didn't really have a lot of black men who were being butlers and everything like that, and it was easier for them to hire a black maid rather than anything. So, you know, that was crazy how all of that happened, and just knowing that, that's an easier way for them to keep the family separated, because if she was a living domestic, then her best bet would be for her to most likely not even be married, let alone even have any kids. It would probably be best for her to just do that at that time. But if she was married and she did have children, then I could see that being a strain on the family relationship between her husband and her children, as she wouldn't be able to see them as often unless she probably had weekends off, and that would be the only time she would see them. But that was interesting, and what I did find, and the way that I found that out is I had to go through and look, and I found like a blog where someone actually left a comment where they were basically talking about something that involved one of their relatives based on some stories they were telling them from very back in the day. And I'm going to see if I can read some more of this here. It says, in the 1930s, the Civilian Conservation Corps tried to locate a black company in Burbank and was refused for a lease for land because of an old ordinance of the cities of Burbank and Glendale, which prohibited Negroes from remaining inside municipal limits after sundown. The Grinnell Heights subdivision advertised as restrictive covenants, superb views of mountains and valley, FHA approved, schools within easy walking distance, protective restrictions. No portions of this tract shall ever be at any time used or occupied by anybody but the white or Caucasian race. In early 40s, Pappy worked with Lockheed Burbank, a black man came to California to work at Lockheed Burbank because he couldn't make more money than his previous job. He worked days. One time he had to work overtime, and his grandfather volunteered to drive him home after dark in LA. He was okay in the car as long as there was a white man with him. In Burbank, it was understood that blacks had to be gone by sundown. Relatively recently in the 60s, 10 years ago, eating in a restaurant in Burbank, an elderly white man told a waitress to tell us to move. We were not that surprised. I was in an aisle next to the tables. My friends had just sat down. The man walked over to the waitress. I was standing closest to her. He told her to ask them to move. She said she couldn't do that. I went over to my friends to see if they heard what I thought I heard. Then they confirmed it. I asked the waitress. She just shook her head. My friend grew up in Burbank. He's a very dark-skinned Sicilian. He told me that growing up there, that was the rule. And then I get to the part where it's at the end where it's talking about most of Burbank's black population in the 50s was women because they were living domestics. However, Burbank is of now no longer a sundown town. But it's crazy because if you look at how Burbank is now, you would never expect it. But that's how it was back in the day. Now, that piece that I just wrote, that was from somebody's experience. That was a piece that was from somebody's experience up from Burbank, California. But that's really all I have right now for Burbank, California, as far as this sundown town goes. Usually I would have a whole rundown like I usually do for the other ones, but I really couldn't find anything on the site that I got that I really get that from. And I'm glad that I found this piece right here because I wouldn't have found it on that particular site. But I'm glad that I was able to find it anyway and bring this to you because this may have been some information that you did not know about. But y'all let me know what y'all think about this down in the comments. Like, share, subscribe. Make sure you have your notifications turned on. Follow me on Twitter if you haven't done so already. This has been another edition of the Sundown series. We are now in California. Stay tuned for the next one, and I'll talk to you in the next one.